Welcome to the Empowered Spirit Show. This is your host, Terri Ann Heiman. I'll explore the connection to the human spirit in a way that helps to navigate your life, including crisis. I am passionate about helping you to open up to your intuition and the metaphysical world of spirit to find your confidence in your own inner guidance. Take a pause, be inspired, learn ways to show up focused, centered, and more dynamic in your everyday life.
Welcome back to the Empowered Spirit Show. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining me today. This episode is being sponsored by Ritual and Shelter. Are you looking for a magical place to shop and hold space? Check out Ritual and Shelter online or in Homewood, Alabama. Browse through their bookshelves covering topics such as energy healing, crystal healing, Reiki, chakras, auras, the Akashic Records, shadow work, astrology, and earth-based healing. You can also find herbal teas and tinctures alongside their crystals and oils to help establish a mindful mindset and fluid ambience before meditation, ritual work, and reflection. Ritual and Shelter is dedicated to providing one-on-one, in-depth conversations with customers to help them find the most efficient healing methods and resources that match their unique interest and energy. They offer tarot sessions, Reiki, sound bowl, and crystal healing, and now they are offering witch consultations. Visit ritualshelter.com to book an appointment and bring peace back to the body, mind, and spirit. You can also find them on Instagram at Ritual Shelter Shop, as well as Pinterest at Ritual Plus Shelter. So as this podcast goes to air, we find ourselves going deeper and deeper into the liminal space between worlds. We stand right here at one of the most mystical times of the year. The wheel is turned. We're moving from Halloween into today is All Saints Day and tomorrow, Day of the Dead. But it's really all one big, huge portal of energy opening up to this sacred energy that we all can tap into. It has this energy coming forward for us to connect to the spirit world. We have a super new moon coming in Taurus on Wednesday. Taurus is an earth element, so it helps us to ground with all those messages and signs coming in that we are receiving. So this November 5th supermoon is known also as the Beaver Moon, focused on themes of stability, security, grounding, inviting a focus of your values, as well as the material comforts that you always seek. It represents a time for preparation and gratitude, encouraging you to reflect on what you have built while letting go of what no longer serves. Beaver Moon traditionally symbolizes a preparation and patience, as beavers do build dams for winter. Astrologically, this translates to reflecting on your hard work and what you have been building throughout this year. It is preparing us all for that cycle of life that we come into. As a supermoon, it can be more amplified, more intense emotions. We know that under the full moon, and can lead you to a powerful awareness of that inner landscape. We are also in the shadow of the Mercury retrograde, which begins November 9th and will go through November 20th. This will begin in the sign of Sagittarius and then move into that intensity of Scorpio. Now, expect delays, communications, travel, hiccups, all of those kind of tech issues. I've already been experiencing those. And just slow down. That's really what all of this energy is inviting us to do. Pull our energy in, slow down, and notice all the many things going on around you and within you. Notice the patterns that keep repeating. My next online class is all about this. It's called Past, Present, Future, the Akashic Healing Timeline Method for Breaking Cycles. Do you feel like you're caught in the same thing, attracting the same circumstances over and over and over, but yet you don't quite know how to break that? This is exactly what this class is all about. Saturday, November 8th at 10 a.m., a free online masterclass. Join me. Or schedule a spiritual upgrade breakthrough call, and let's talk about what it is that keeps you spinning those same grooves over and over and over again. I'll put the links for the masterclass and the call in the show notes. And before I forget, I wanted to mention the Reiki Raise Healing Summit is coming up November 7th through November 11th. Every gathering they've shared has been a deeper dive into healing, growth, and connection through Reiki. It's free, it's online, and the theme this year is the 10 gatherings of light, rooted in truth, returning to the self. So this is an online free summit. Every day, more interviews will be opened up, but you also can purchase it for your library and listen to it at your own leisure. Early bird price of just $57. I have learned so much every year, even as a Reiki master teacher. I'm always learning more. There's been more and more ways that Reiki has opened us up into our everyday life. Check it out. So worth it. I'll put the links for that in the show notes as well. So in our last several episodes, we've been talking about the spirit world, the thinning of the veils. And even last week, we talked about that intersection of energy healing and witchcraft. We've explored how intuition and ancient practices can be integrated into our modern lives. And as we stand at this powerful threshold of the year, it's the perfect time to go deeper into the how and the why behind these mystical experiences. Today, we're shifting our focus from the hands-on practice of Reiki to the mind itself. What is the psychology behind ritual and magic? How do our beliefs shape our reality? So I am thrilled to welcome Richard Kaczynski to the show today, author of Mind Over Magic, The Psychology of Rituals, to help us explore these questions. Before we begin, let's take a moment to pause and center and set an intention for this full moon energy coming in. So wherever you are, if you can, close your eyes for a moment. Taking a nice deep inhale, expanding the breath up the body. And as you exhale, call all your energy into you. Take another deep inhale, breathing up the body. And as you exhale, call in the spiritual body to align right on top of the emotional, mental, physical layers, centering, grounding. Inhale, expanding the breath up the body. And as you exhale, drop right into the heart, right into the deepest part of your heart. Feel that connection with your spirit and the greater spirit. Know that you are loved, guided, protected. Feeling all this energy coming in around us as we go to create this sacred space. Calling in our Reiki master teachers, those that have come before us. Calling in the angels to open the heart with joy and love. Calling in the crystal beings for amusement and magnification. Calling in your higher self to receive the messages for you right now. Taking another deep inhale and exhale as we honor this great wheel of life. We find ourselves where I am in the direction of the west for the season of the fall. This is where the sun sets. We see these beautiful colors. We notice the cycles of our life, the letting go, the renewal, the gathering, and the harvesting of our work. Honoring each of these directions, calling in to the west, the north, the east, and the south, above us, below us, right into the very center, setting an intention of your highest light. From what you've set from that new moon, open up. See it, believe it, feel it, know it to be true. Take another deep inhale, and as you exhale, release these intentions out into your aura, setting that energy. Shokure, shokure, shokure. Take another deep inhale, and exhale, breathing all the way down, grounding. Feel the heart open, focusing that third eye center. And as you're ready, blinking the eyes back open, coming back. Richard Kaczynski is a lifetime student and writer on Western Esotericism. He is an authority on the life and works of Aleister Crowley, the author of Perdurabo, The Life of Aleister Crowley, and editor of Aleister Crowley's The Sword of Song. He holds a PhD in psychology with a minor in statistics. His doctoral dissertation examined the structure and correlates of metaphysical beliefs. He is here with us today to discuss his latest book, Mind Over Magic, The Psychology of Ritual Magic. So let us welcome Richard to the show. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, what a great subject, especially this time of year. So, what led you to writing your book, Mind Over Magic: The Psychology of Rituals?
Well, I'd always been interested in alternative spiritualities and those sorts of associated practices. And when I went to college, I decided I wanted to pursue psychology as a field of study. I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I was thinking that in pursuing this, I would find answers to those questions I had about these sorts of practices. And much to my, disappointment, I suppose, I did not find some like grand unified theory that explained all these experiences. And in fact, at the time I went to graduate school, the question of spirituality or religiosity or something like that was not something that was of particular interest in psychology. And a lot of my uh, professors and colleagues thought it was kind of a weird interest. But over the years, if I come to recognize that there are little bits of studies that come out, here and there that say, oh, that kind of explains this sort of phenomenon or this practice. And 30 years out of, graduate school, I came to realize that while there may not be this grand unified theory that explains everything that happens when you're engaged in a spiritual practice, that there are little bits and pieces of research that could be assembled like a jigsaw puzzle to tell a story about the role that psychology plays in these practices and how best to get the most out of what you do and the sorts of benefits, psychologically speaking, that might come from that.
I love that. I actually went off to college too to study psychology and wound up in the fine arts department.
Interesting. The grad program, it was one of those things where because I did not find the answer to, the big spiritual psychology sorts of questions, I came to treat kind of the brain kind of as this black box, things come in, things come out, but it's kind of hard to know exactly what's going on. So I wound up going into social psychology, which looks more at like observable behavior, people in groups. And that's much more of a research field than it is a like a therapy field. And so my minor wound up being statistics, and I came out with, a minor in statistics and then the degree in social psychology. And a lot of my career has been going into that more research-oriented direction, but that left me ultimately in a really good position to evaluate research in psychology for this book.
Yeah, very interesting. And through major life crisis, I found spirituality, and now I actually do work in energy psychology and NLP tapping, and I found it to be very fascinating. My original fascination with psychology is being answered through a lot of the techniques that I use now. So I do find it very fascinating, and ritual especially. Ritual is so powerful. So I know in your book you start off talking about a few experiences you had, younger child, out in the woods. So I guess that was a huge turning point. Want to share that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's various things throughout my childhood kind of point in this direction. And part of me thinks that sometimes it's the times I grew up in, but not everyone of my generation wound up going in this direction. So it clearly wasn't that. But um, the event that you're referring to is at one point I was coming home from my neighbor's house. My godmother had a son who was roughly my age, and we used to, be playmates as children. And I was coming home one evening and heard a twig snap, and looking in her neighbor's yard, I saw a silhouette of, a human-shaped figure, but it was as tall as the garage, and it was moving in my direction. And I didn't know what it was, and I certainly didn't stick around to find out what it was. And I ran into the house, and coming out, the next day, I had my little thinking cap on, and I got my dad's tape measure, and I measured how tall the garage was, and I thought, well, the roof line of the garage, the bottom part of the roof, and it was like, 8, 10 feet, and I'm like, well, that's taller than any person. And this kind of led me to suspect that, oh, again, you're a kid. You're going, oh, that must have been Bigfoot in the backyard. And after I kind of started thinking in those terms, there began to be some manifestations that happened that kind of confirmed that. Now, of course, Bigfoot wasn't growing up in or wasn't living in suburban Detroit. That's ridiculous. But at the same time, there was something happening. And yeah, that I think did kind of plant those roots for trying to understand the sorts of unusual things that people can encounter in their lives that they can't explain. And it turns out these sorts of things are not weird things that happen to a small number of people, but they're actually very common. And whether it's, not everyone's having the sort of experience I described, but there's people who have, visits from departed relatives, that they see UFOs and all sorts of other things that are unexplainable, but in the big scheme, a very common part of the human experience. And these things get often denigrated. People point and say, "Oh, you're crazy" or something like that. And I, part of my goal here is kind of acknowledge that this is actually common human experience and kind of normalize talking about it as something that's kind of unexplainable, but an important part of our lives.
I think it is an important part of our lives. And I think it only takes one or two of these experiences for you or for whoever, myself, I'll speak for myself, to open up and go, yeah, there is something to this. Mine came through Reiki. Mine came through having experience through Reiki that I knew it was beyond me, that I had tapped into. And I guess from that moment on, I never looked back. I never doubted it. And I think that's important when we have those experiences. Lots of times, and here we are talking about the psychology, lots of times people come to me and they go, I must be crazy. People think I'm crazy. I've had these experiences. I'm seeing dead people, or I'm having these experiences that are awakening me. But it's not that they're crazy, that these things are occurring. And I think more and more now, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things about this that's fascinating to me, kind of, again, speaking from this, the perspective of a psychologist, is that when we talk about personality and who we are as individuals, those are traditionally seen to be very fixed characteristics. And yet there are people who have these profound and transformative religious experiences. And it's not necessarily religious experiences. People who are like UFO contactees and things like that also have these things happen where, in an instant, their worldview, their personality can change, and that, in many ways, flies in the face of what we think of as personality. And for me, that idea was very fascinating because ultimately, the goal of these ritual sorts of practices is to kind of tap into, again, your inner self. What is your truth? Who are you? Why are you in this world? And to, improve yourself, to evolve yourself into the best version of yourself. And so, you're not stuck being who you are right now. You can actually evolve yourself and through these practices, and they're
I think
transformative.
I think it's a very important aspect to say that, to like, we can evolve ourselves, especially right now with all the shifts in consciousness, all the disruption, not just in our country, but all over the world, that finding ways to evolve and to move forward and to get out of the rut that we may find ourselves in is very important. And I think the ritual and some of the work that you're talking about can help us to do that. We can't just keep going doing the same thing the same way. We have to expand that consciousness of who we are. And so we do go within ourselves instead of kind of that surface living, when we can come in and recognize we do have all that we need within us. Now, sometimes we have to get guidance or read books like yours or go a little deeper. Now, what led you to actually practicing magic?
Me, it was everywhere growing up. There's this book series called Man, Myth, and Magic that you could buy like weekly editions in the grocery store. In fact, there was a book on techniques of high magic that was a trade paperback that we found at the local grocery store. And I was like a young teenager, like 13, 14 or something. I made my mom buy this for me, and she obligingly did. But it's just all this stuff was out there. My older sister, Diane, she took a semester to do an independent study in junior high school, and she chose to interview a local celebrity witch by the name of Gundella, the Green Witch. And she came home from that, interview, and she had like this record that the lady had made, but also little packets of incense samples and a planchette and a deck of, Rider Waite Smith tarot cards and things like that. And for her, this was a school project. She wrote the paper and she moved on. But, she had this little package of things that she just kind of put away and forgot about, but it was like endlessly fascinating to me. And
The
yeah, at
little
one point,
brother didn't forget about it. The little
yeah,
brother,
yeah,
yeah, he was intrigued, right? Yeah, I meant to,
right.
I guess I should have asked, like, how old were you? So you were a teenager.
Yeah, yeah. And at one point, I discovered the local metaphysical bookshop that was, and I got on my bike and drove those 5 miles to check it out. And, I picked up this book by Israel Regardie, about the rituals of the secret society called The Golden Dawn, which is very popular in London, England in the late 1900 or late 1800s, early 1900s. And I came back, a couple weeks later, and the owner asked me how I liked that book, and I said, "Oh, that was it was great. I enjoyed it." And he said, "Well, you should probably check out this other book." And he pointed out to me a book by Aleister Crowley called Magic and Theory and Practice. And I'll say just take a moment out right now just to say, I've since written a biography of Crowley, and I'll just say that there's a lot of misinformation out there about
Hmm.
Crowley, and he's kind of got this bad reputation about people who aren't really familiar with what he was actually all about. But be that as it may, reading this book really piqued my curiosity. In between, that Israel Regardie Golden Dawn book and Aleister Crowley's Magic and Theory and Practice, I was like, it was a puzzle. Again, I needed to figure it out, and so I think it was that puzzle solving part of me that drew me down this path to again to figure this all out, and then that led to the psychology, and that led to this book.
Yeah, I saw that you had done a lot of work on him and written about him. And I think that's important that we find out that true information because that is a really well known work there and just talking about his life and all that he's done. So I think that's really important. Now, getting into the book, you start off talking about the psychology of connecting the dots and seeing the big picture. Let's talk a little bit about that from where we start to where we're really hoping to go to.
Yeah, I think the reason I start with that is that this idea that comes out of Gestalt psychology is that we are pattern seeking creatures, as many people have said, and we will fill in the dots when we have evidence. We try and connect those dots, we're looking for things that may be dangerous in our environment. My cave neighbor Thog, ate this berry and died. That must mean I should not eat these berries, and um, but all sorts of other things. There's examples of like figure ground sorts of things where you can have like a silhouette or something or a partial picture, and we can fill in the blanks in our own minds. And this extends to how we perceive the world around us. And one of the things that's often pointed out as a criticism of people who are on this spiritual path or these sorts of practices are that they tend to see things where there aren't things going on. They see an agenticity, it's called. There's some force or some cause behind things that are truly random. And one of the things I explore in the book is how this is something that cuts both ways, that it may be true that believers, people who are seeking knowledge, information, may be more inclined to see patterns because they are looking. The flip side is also true that people who are very skeptical and are disinclined to like believe anything tend to miss patterns when there really are some. And I kind of advocate for kind of this middle path. I think you should be open to new knowledge and new information. I love when I come across ideas, research, points of view that challenge my assumptions. But at the same time, I think you also need to approach this with a critical eye and kind of walk that middle path between being too ready to accept everything, but also being too ready to reject everything.
Discernment.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, I think discernment's a good word too, because I think it is important. But you also talk about even the practice of it and how we get into that. And you really are a big believer in yoga and meditation. So important that we find the way to get out of the chatter of the mind. And most of us have trouble with that. I mean, we're living in this 5G world and we're doing this all day, and it becomes harder and harder if we don't have a consistent practice. But I think that's part of being in the practice of magic. Is that true? Would you agree?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think I'll preface what I'm about to say by saying that when I talk about magic, I'm speaking in very broad terms. And so, I'm talking about any practice that is done kind of consistently or routinely. Some of those practices can be every day, some of those practices can be seasonal, but it's not necessarily saying that you're following a particular tradition. Yoga can be a practice, but so can, prayer, so can more ceremonial things where people might do something like a banishing ritual every day, or clearing your space and things like that. And so the definition of what I mean by magic can actually be very broad. I'm not just talking, like witches or something specifically like that. Oh, that certainly includes those practices. But yeah, a big component of getting the most out of any practice you do is mindfulness. And if you're trying to meditate, but your mind's wandering, if you're on your phone, you're worrying about, how many people have liked my most recent post, you're not going to be getting the benefits of that meditation. If you're saying words over a meal, but again, you're just doing it automatically, and you're not really thinking about what those words mean or the meal that you're going to eat. Um, that again, you're not getting the benefit from that. Or if you're going outside and you're, again, greeting the sun, but again, you're just saying words mindlessly as opposed to actually feeling the warmth of the sun or the breeze in your hair and being present, and engaging with the experience. I mean, that's part of what I talk about, just this idea of, you know, being there, paying attention to what you're doing. And that's a big piece of getting the most out of whatever, practices that you may undertake.
Yeah, I so agree. And you spell the word magic, Magick, right? And I will
Correct.
preface this and just kind of echo what you say, because magic is a big word. And I know I've always spelled it Magic. And I used to like kind of go, no, Reiki's not magic. No, don't use that word magic. Don't use that word magic. But now that I've kind of, had so many years behind me, there is a little bit of feeling like when we're practicing Reiki, especially when we get in the higher levels and we have our symbols and we have our manifestations going on, it can feel like magic. And so I do think that word has a big interpretation, but the difference between Magic and Magick is?
Yeah, I went back and forth a lot about how I wanted to spell the word. And part of the reason for that is that the spelling with the K was, in modern times at least, coined by Aleister Crowley. And my concern was that by using that spelling, I didn't want to box this book in too much into that very specific set of beliefs. But at the same time, the spelling has been adopted by lots of other people in the esoteric community. And I think it comes back to, Crowley's motivation for adopting this older spelling of the word. And that is he wanted to distinguish the practices he was talking about from stage magic and sleight of hand.
Hmm.
And speaking to your point about how magic is a big word, Crowley's definition of magic was actually very big as well, because he defined it as the science and arts of causing change to occur in conformity with will. And there's a kind of a lot to unpack there, but the idea that it's will is that this is an intentional act, that there's a science to it and there's an art to it. And I kind of see my book as kind of talking about the science piece of it, not the art piece of it. So I'm not saying that everything is psychology. I'm just saying let's look at the psychology piece to better understand it. But finally, this idea that any intentional act is a magical act. So it's not just, again, casting a circle or, pulling out your tarot cards, but literally anything that you do with intention is magic. And so for that reason, I think that spelling applies, because I am speaking in the broadest sense of people's practices and whatever traditions they may belong to.
I agree. And I have definitely opened up to that so much more because I have felt it myself and had those moments where, like, wow, there's nothing else that can describe this. And it's almost like the belief of miracles as well. Like, I believe in miracles 100% of the time, 100% all the time, right? That kind of idea,
Yeah.
which helps us then to go even deeper. But in the idea of social psychology, the whole idea also, too, not only the practice that we do, but when we create that group and that sacred circle, let's speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of research that talks about how when people are engaged in synchronous behavior, when we're doing things together, and it could just be as simple as like playing a game or something like that, or tapping your finger in time to music. And psychology shows that when you're engaged in this sort of synchronous behavior, there are brainwave patterns and other aspects of your physiology that synchronize with the people around you, and that your evaluation of the people around you are more positive than someone who is not in sync. There are some experiments where people are tapping like out of sync with the music, or not playing along with the game, as it were. And those sorts of research extends to what happens in a group. When people get together in a drum circle, they're doing a synchronous activity. When people are reciting something together in the context of a ritual of some sort, whether it be in church or something else, they are again engaging in the synchronous activity. And there's again, so those psychological benefits that happen from our physiology and our brains kind of working together in that kind of a context.
Yeah, like the Maharishi effect, when we all meditate together and how that can raise consciousness and reduce crime, as the Maharishi effect really went in to talk about a lot as well. So there is something to be said about the sacred circle and coming in. And even I know for myself, just creating that sacred circle around myself and creating that sacred circle in my sacred space, I think that's very helpful. And right there is a ritual that helps me set up that inner energy for me to then carry on and move through my day. So I think it's all important whether we have that for ourselves and we have it as a group. I think they're both very important and have different aspects to it as well. Yeah. So what is your hopes for the book?
I'm hoping that reaches a broad audience. A lot of the books I've written before have kind of, again, focused on Western esotericism, specifically in the ceremonial magic sorts of practice. And while that's a thing I'm very much interested in, I think the content of this book applies to a much broader group of practices. So I'm really hopeful and curious to see, with what audiences, this book clicks. So I'm looking forward to it, as it comes out, more people have a chance to read it and get their impressions.
So in your lifelong practice, I will say, have you noticed that today there is a more awareness and more people wanting to open up to this kind of work?
I mean, in the big sense, I've been at this for decades. I think so, because, when I was first getting into this as that, teenager riding his bike to the local bookshop, there wasn't, an internet. There wasn't, local groups, to support, one's, or community, to engage with. And now people can easily find information online. They can engage with groups, either, again, on social networking, but also it's much easier to make those social connections through meetups and other sorts of things in real life spaces as well. So I do think that there's opportunities there. I think there also tends to be a little bit of siloing, that people want to, stick to their specific community. And one of the things I really consciously make an effort to do is to go to conferences and events that are kind of outside my tradition, as it were, to, again, connect with other people, both for my benefit of seeing how other people, live their lives and work through their traditions, but also to represent my traditions as well, so that people, can have that chance to get out of their silos and see that there's a larger world of people who are maybe not exactly like-minded, but similar-minded enough for us to all have community together.
Yeah, I so agree. Hence my podcast too. I mean, it's kind of why I started. I moved to Birmingham. Nobody really understood. Not nobody, but it was a small population. But now it's grown. Even I will just give a shout out to Ritual and Shelter. They're our podcast sponsor, but they started out right around COVID, I guess it was right before COVID, as like a tarot witch shop. And although they maintain that as a core, they have expanded into so much more metaphysical, offering Reiki and offering a lot of different modalities, classes, and teachings. And that whole essence of expanding right here in Birmingham has been great to see because I believe we need it. I believe we need
That's
that
amazing.
expansion and right and be able to grow and understand because again, my story, many of my listeners know, you go through the same thing. You go through the same traditional kind of therapy and it's not working, right? And you need something a little more. And so finding that energy work and the way to go deeper is very important for us to kind of get to that core part of who we truly are. That's why I get fascinated by talking about the soul work. Look at our soul and the journey of the soul and what we've come here to evolve. And I do believe a lot of the practices and what you're talking about can help us to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's great to hear that this store exists in Birmingham. One of the things I've noticed is that, the little bookstore I used to go to as a 14-year-old kid doesn't exist anymore. A lot of the metaphysical bookshops that I used to give talks at pretty routinely around the country and around the world don't exist anymore. And it's harder and harder to kind of maintain that brick and mortar storefront. So it's great to see when that succeeds because that's such a valuable resource for your community, for people who are looking for that.
It really is. And she has like from books to kits to candles to incense to, I mean, so many things. It's amazing to see. And I laughed when you were talking about going to the grocery store because I'm thinking, well, we used to get romance magazines. I didn't even know there was, metaphysical magazines back there. But so much has changed. And I think it's important to help us in the evolution of it all to expand our reading, to expand the way we look at life. It's so needed right now. It really is. And I know right now, in the world, there's a lot of depressed energy. There really is. People waking up, feeling disheartened. I know in the mornings I wake up channeling some of that energy from the universe. It's like, okay, let me use my tools. So it's my ritual in the morning that helped me to get out of feeling that lower vibration, of feeling despair, feeling like even this morning, it's like there's no reason for me to feel like distress, like, no, but this is the universal energy. And so when we know we're tapping into that through expanding our consciousness, it helps us. Otherwise, we can all think again, like, I'm crazy, something's wrong with me. But when we recognize we're tapping into universal consciousness, then we can have the tools and techniques, many of which you describe in your book, to help us. And that shows the psychology of how we can, I think, keep carrying on this light, raise our vibration to help make these shifts. I really would. Yeah. What would you say is the most surprising thing you learned about putting all this together?
I think the surprising thing to me was that there was a jigsaw puzzle to put together at all, because for so long I kind of thought, okay, this isn't going to give me the answers I'm looking for. I mean, I'll make a career here, but I'm not going to find the answers originally sought. And then when I started to research this book, and as you go through the book, it starts from daily practices to specific rituals to, doing group ritual to actually like initiating to some kind of a tradition, and also how to evaluate your own work, kind of using the scientific method. Um, there's actually a story, a consistent story that can be told, and that's what this book does.
Yeah. Do you think we have to be initiated into like a private coven or a sector or a group, or can we be more universal?
No, yeah, I mean, there's benefits of joining a group and that you do get to hang out with like-minded people, and that provides a sort of recharging of your batteries or enthusiasm. But ultimately, the work that you do is work that you do privately. You go home and you do that work, and you don't need to join a group, to do that. I think the society or the social aspect of it is more of a reinforcement, but it's not a necessity.
So, what have you found about magic and the approach to it with a scientific mindset? How is that different, or is it?
Well, I think in putting this puzzle together, the thing that I realized is there's a lot of psychological levers that get pulled and pushed and moved when one does any kind of ritual or spiritual practice. And there's things that happen when you're meditating. There's things that happen when, again, you create a circle. There's when you're calling, the watchtowers or the archangels or whatever it happens to be, when you put on a special garment. when you're doing these things, or if you pick up tarot cards, or if you have implements that you use, a bell, or a wand or whatever. But all of these things manipulate psychological levers in us, and that those things help put us into this liminal space. And I don't claim to explain what happens in that liminal space. It's that liminal space where the magic happens. But it's these psychological tools that give us access to that space, or help us get access to that space and make it a little easier to get there. And then by knowing that and being able to take advantage of that, we can make those experiences come easier and to be more transformative, which is ultimately the goal.
It is ultimately the goal. And I just echo that and say, like, science is proving what many of us have already known. But it is really good to see. And I think your book really helps those, especially skeptics perhaps, to recognize there is a science behind it. There is a psychological aspect to it, that it's not just woo. I hear that all the time. Oh, it's just woo. Okay, I'd rather have woo than have the angst of the world. But hey, right? Sometimes we have to give a little bit of explanation to it. So I really am grateful for your work and that you've brought it out here for all of us to have the opportunity to go a little deeper and understand it from a different perspective, right? And I know sometimes, like, I just take it for granted, although I do have to go into the practice to make sure it works. And I know I tell my students, like, don't take my word, go practice it. Like you said, you come home with it, you practice it, you create the rituals that work for you. And that's the magic, I think. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
So Richard, where can we find your work? Are you teaching? What else is going on for you?
Well, and I have places on social media where you can find me. I do have a website. It's just richard-kaczynski.com. But I'm also on social media. You can find me on Facebook, on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky. And I'm not teaching anything right now. I had a kind of busy summer doing a lot of classes, but looking forward to picking this up a little bit later as we get back into kind of the springtime. Seems to be when a lot of these events are going on, and with Mind Over Magic coming out in October 7th is the launch date. So I'm hoping that'll open up a lot of other opportunities to share the news.
That's awesome. I will put all your links in the show notes, and give a shout out to Inner Traditions for bringing this forward. They are awesome and all that they do for many people, for sure. So as we go to close, I like to come back and just ask the question, how do you feel that the work that you're doing with Mind Over Magic and bringing that psychological approach can help to empower the spirit right now?
I think it comes back to the thing that I said just a few moments ago. It's that by understanding how the role of psychology in the practices that we undertake in our spirituality, we can get the most out of those practices. And to the extent to which our spirituality is aimed at, again, inner transformation, raising our consciousness, becoming the best version of ourselves, that we can do that more effectively through that understanding.
Yeah, becoming the best versions of ourselves. Recognizing our patterns, recognizing that we can come within to help that in raising our consciousness and all those around us. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. All the best of luck with your work, to your spirit.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. What a powerful conversation. Yes. By understanding the psychology behind our spiritual practices, we can truly get the most out of them. When we're seeking inner transformation, raising our consciousness, evolving into the best version of ourselves, this understanding becomes essential. It allows us to engage more intentionally and effectively with the rituals and practices that serve our growth. We each have the power to go within and facilitate our own transformation. And in doing so, we raise not only our consciousness, but create a ripple effect that touches all of those around us. This is especially potent during this time of year, this sacred season when the veil between the worlds is thin and we're more open to receiving messages, signs, and the deeper truth of our soul's journey. We can connect with those that have passed, with the spirit world, with all of the consciousness around us. So may this season of darkness illuminate your path inward. Reach out, schedule a spiritual upgrade call with me. Let's talk about your path and how I can help you go deeper within. Thanks again for listening. I am your host, Terri Ann Heiman. Until next time, stay empowered to your spirit. Namaste.